for this afternoon segment to have with us today Mark Partridge. He's the Swank Chair in Urban Rural Policy at The Ohio State University in the Department of Agricultural, Environmental, and Development Economics. He's a colleague of many of ours. We're very happy to have him here with us today. He's quite an accomplished colleague. One of the most interesting things I found about Mark was actually he's from an extremely rural area in Montana. Right? He grew up in Montana. Areas in Montana that probably experience maybe even more difficult development conditions than we have here in the state of Ohio. I don't know. But he spent time in Montana. He graduated from the University of Montana, got an MA from the University of Wyoming, got his PhD from the University of Illinois. He's been here for 10 years, 12 years, 13 years, right? 13 years as the Swank Chair. We're very happy to have him today. Mark, without further ado, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks for the intro. I picked hopefully a provocative title. In fact, this is kind of the public version of a talk I've been giving all over. I gave it in Ireland to academics in Chile, Australia, gave it in San Antonio, but this is more of the public version of it. And of course, I'll just say to the previews, of course, the answer is yes, we're going to have rural communities, and yes, most will survive. And the urbanites should care. For God's sake, it's my job security. I'll be cleaning toilets if if rural areas go away. So should we care? And so one of the things is that when I'm typically asked to give this talk is there's this stereotype that rural areas are just in this persistent decline. They're just this monolithic group, and they're all in decline. They're just all. And in fact, among an economic development, academic economic development listserv last night, somebody was advocating why are we even using money to help prop up these rural areas? It's just a waste of money and so on. This notion that they're dying. Okay, and I'm going to argue that that's definitely not the case, or at best extremely simplistic. One of the things, though, that's created, in fact, I was talking to Gene Krebs a little bit about this, is that there's less mixture between rural and urbanites than what there was, say, a generation or two ago. That in the past there was significantly more rural to urban migration, and so it was large shares of the population, and say in Columbus would have had like relatives still out on the farm or in the rural community. And that's not the case, or not nearly the case as it once was. And so that leads to this I'll call it a divide, which some people have, but in the sense it's more of a ignorance. There's not a lot of interaction between the two, and that creates things. So I'm going to argue that rural areas are going to play a key role in our future, most are sustainable, but I'm not going to be a charlatan or jokingly a consultant, though that's a cheap shot. Somebody could say, well, at least I'm not a dismal scientist. I'm not going to say all rural areas are going to thrive. In fact, Brent mentioned I'm from eastern Montana. It's the plains part of Montana, and it's not. A lot of those counties have lost 80% of their population in the last century. It would be hard for me to come up with a solution for a county of 3,000 square miles with 800 people, but we're nowhere near anything like that in virtually all of Ohio. So, when we talk about rural policy and how much government support, I'm certainly aware of the fact that government funds are scarce. We have high-valued alternatives like education and healthcare and so on. How should we be spending it? And in that sense, I acknowledge that we may need some sort of triage. That there are, and I'll show you in Ohio. I'll show you some that are doing much better than Columbus. We need some sort of triage where just get out of the way, let them just do it. Then we have others where support could push them over the top, get them over a threshold where they'll do okay. And then we have others that are just, really going to struggle. Not so much here in Ohio, which I'm going to show you, but in the country where we could throw the GDP of Brazil at them and we're not going to make a huge difference. And so we don't want to spread our resources too thin. So of course we're going to have rural areas, and a lot of it's just a lifestyle choice. Many people are willing to give up income to live in rural areas because they like the lifestyle. So Brent said I'm from Miles City, Montana, which is the city of eastern Montana. It has almost 10,000 people, and eastern Montana is a little bit bigger than the size of Ohio geographically, and it has about 80,000 people. So we're talking about not much. But the nice thing about it is, one of my friends told me last summer is you can set your GPS and your departure time and your arrival time is the same. The two cars at the street light and people are bitching about a traffic jam. And there's certain aspects of the lifestyle. In particular, 25 years ago, one of the things that helped rural areas a lot, I'm not advocating this as a policy solution today, was urban crime was so high, it pushed people, rural areas had a really appealing aspect. So one of the things that's actually hurt rural areas is crime has fallen so much, there's not so much of a push compared to a generation ago. But nonetheless, rural areas are a primary source of our environment, food, energy, commodities, natural amenities. So I'm going to argue rural has a future, but why the interest? So I've been, in fact, I was in Boston yesterday, and I'm amazed at the ignorance about rural areas. They're very interested in rural areas. Of course, with the election, and they're very aware of this map where all this swath of red that President Trump won, and they know that's rural areas, and they're intrigued by this. How did this? What's going on there? Are they? It must be because all these towns are dying and they're all upset. So they're quite intrigued. And this is around the world. We can look at where Brexit votes were. You have a strong, we'll call it London, rest of England divide. You can look at the way Italy voted in their last election. You see a similar divide where the South, the less developed part, voted particularly for a populist government. So it's a worldwide, it's Brazil quite recently and so on. This rural areas voting for what the establishment calls populist right-wing governments. But so that's the interest. But I just want to state some obvious things. Rural areas depend on urban areas for urban areas depend on rural areas for employment. A large share of the rural workforce commutes into cities. A large share commutes into cities. Likewise, a lot of rural residents come into cities for shopping. They're a market. They come in because there's urban amenities such as museums and sporting events and so forth. However, urbanites, of course, depend upon rural areas for food. If they want a clean environment, they better have a healthy rural area. One of the things that if rural areas aren't doing particularly well economically, there's going to be a lot of pressure then to exploit the environment. And that may not be a great strategy in the long run for them. But urbanites, if they want to protect the environment, they need to be thinking about rural economic health. And so there's this interdependence that is definitely there. So more attention to rural policy is needed, as I said, politically, socially, environmentally, environmentally, socially, and economically in particular. But one of the things is that internationally, though, I think this is something it's been this. If I could read the New York Times 35 years ago, and I could read the same article that I get today. The coasts are doing great. There's inevitable decline in the middle, and that's actually not true. I mean, I could take you to some of the fastest growing places in the country, and they're in the middle. OECD, which is the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, it's a major international think tank in Paris. They note that there's no rural, non-metropolitan decline internationally. You can find countries where it is, but that's not necessarily a general trend throughout the developed world. So rural areas face challenges, but it's not like they're just going to go away. So what's my definition of rural? So I want to define that. Everybody has their own definition of rural. So a New York Times reporter, they go out and they see a few cows, they see some soybeans and corn, they think that's rural. And certainly maybe in some aspects that there's not a lot of people, culturally it's rural. But I'm an economist, so I want to talk about what's economically rural. Economically rural is you do not have integration to a city. So if you have a lot of people are commuting into a city, I consider that urban in the sense that you're integrated with the city in terms of your economy, your local economy. And that's the definition actually the government uses when they call a metropolitan area. That is how they actually define it. Is there significant commuting into a city? We call that metropolitan. If not, we call that non-metropolitan. So that's going to be my definition. If you're not really integrated to a city of at least 50,000 people, which is the government's definition. I wish it was higher. Here in Ohio, Lima is a metropolitan area, though people from Lima tend to think of themselves as rural, which I would tend to agree. So given that pep talk, urban areas definitely face a lot of, have a lot of advantages over rural areas. You know, economists call it agglomeration economies. These are benefits that my customers are nearby, my suppliers are nearby. Here in the city, we can share resources. In other words, we can share this great highway system, the airport. It gives us productivity advantages that you can't have in rural areas. Likewise, a lot of things have been held up and said, oh, by say in the popular wisdom, it's going to be held up as, oh, this is going to save rural areas, as things like the internet, that people can live anywhere and they can telecommute to work, and that's been something since the early 1990s. However, the evidence is actually suggests that the internet's made cities more livable. If I live in Paris or Washington or Columbus, I don't have to go into work every day. We're one of the biggest drawbacks of Columbus, or especially Washington or Paris, is traffic congestion. So I just saved myself a lot of hassle because I don't have to go into work 3 days a week if I have a certain job. Likewise, with something like Amazon, people say, well, you can buy things from rural markets. The problem is with the internet is you can also buy things from Amazon if you live in rural areas. And of course, Amazon, like they do to urban brick and mortar stores, they can do similar things to rural brick and mortar stores. So, you know, the internet is not going to necessarily be the salvation of rural areas. You know, I think it really improves quality of life. And it's just essential for education. And I go on about why we probably should subsidize rural broadband. However, thinking of it as an economic savior would be too much. And indeed, I just want to note one of my colleagues at the University of Wisconsin, he points out that there's some sort of what he calls a Netflix effect, that when rural kids come to the University of Wisconsin, they go, wow, I get Netflix really fast. I like broadband. Okay, so what's a metropolitan area? So to me, I'm an economist. I care what people are doing in terms of work. I don't necessarily care about culture. So this is the Columbus metropolitan area. All the green here in the middle, that's metropolitan. So you got everything from Hockley County, Perry County, up to Morrow County. Because at least 25% of the workforce is commuting back and forth with Columbus, they're considered part of the metropolitan area. So I consider that urban to an economist. Now, I know you're going to say, well, when I go to Hockley County, well, it seems pretty rural to me. Yeah, I agree. Culturally, it is, but economically, it's highly integrated with the city of Columbus. So nationally, and I got my arrow here because I gave this internationally, not because I forget where Ohio is, but though senility is slowly setting in. The dark green is metropolitan America. Any city of 50,000 people, along with counties with tight commuting linkages. Light green is cities of 10, and I'm going through this because I'm going to talk about Ohio data, 10 to 50,000 people in any county with tight commuting linkages. So this is like I'll talk about Salina, Ohio would be an example of this. They're called micropolitan areas. I consider, they're considered rural because they're not very big, but they kind of act like, they take on some city functions. And white is nowhere where there's even a city of 50,000 people. There's no commuting links. It is what people do this called core rural. It is real rural. That's the white area. So Ohio even has some white areas, as I'll talk about, that are generally not doing all that bad. So that is nonsense. I guess it's sort of there. That's Ohio. And the point is that some of Ohio metropolitan areas cross into Kentucky, and some West Virginia metropolitan areas cross into Ohio. And when I report data, I'm only reporting the Ohio part of metropolitan areas. So I just wanted to note that. But you also see the white; those are core rural. I was just talking to Gene Krebs. I said there's Preble County, core rural, no connection to an urban center, and so forth. And then the light green, like a Chillicothe, small city, but not really it's not urban. It's a small city. Okay, so what's happening out there in America? So one of the reasons why there's this, and I won't spend a lot of time, but this shows the standard deviation, how much variation in per capita income across U.S. counties. And I just want to note what you see is from the Civil War to the mid-1970s, we were growing together. Incomes were becoming closer and closer together. Since the mid-1970s, there's been this rather rapid increase that incomes are becoming more apart. And so there is truth to the notion that there are places falling behind. We see this divergence taking place. I can look at employment growth, how fast jobs are growing. That was converging across the country, but since the Great Recession, it's been growing apart. A lot of places, most of rural America, not rural Ohio, they're growing really slow in terms of job growth, while urban America is where a disproportionate share of the jobs are. And you can see it saying just in terms of population growth. This is population growth across the U.S. Green is fast, red is population decline. And as I joke, I came from this county, and the one little green little spot, if I moved back, it would double its population. But most of, you see the red. You don't see a huge amount of red, but you definitely see it, especially in the Great Plains. If you look in the last 7 years, last 7 years since the Great Recession, you see a swath of red. You see it's just a swath of red. Now, the good news, that means most of this is rural America. About 60% of rural American counties lost population since the Great Recession. The good news is that, I'll show you here in a second, it's actually improving. So first off, I want to just describe, because this doesn't fit, not all of it, but if I was talking about nationally and internationally, and when I'm describing rural U.S., there's really three, regional and urban economists, but there's really three rural Americas. There's the rural parts that are not necessarily have high commuting, but they have some commuting to urban areas. They're urban adjacent, they're nearby. So that greatly helps them. So there's less needs to be done about those. Fortunately, that's a lot of rural Ohio. High amenity, like this is like the Rocky Mountains, the Rocky Mountain West. They're doing spectacularly well. I mean, the Washington Post had an article on it. There's a town in Montana that I've been to many times in the Rocky Mountains, and they were stunned that it was growing, but it's been, if you've been paying attention for the last 40 years, they've been growing. And then the ones that are struggling tend to be remote, resource dependent. And that's why when I was talking about the Great Plains, that swath of red, that would be population loss. That's the areas that are really struggling. However, as I point out, one of the reasons why rural America, to a New York Times reporter today, would look like it's doing so terrible is basically you're looking at it today backwards. If we were in 1950 and we looked at what was considered urban America in 1950 and rural America in 1950, and we asked who did better, it was rural America. Rural America did better. Let me show you what I mean. This is going back to 1969, population growth. So if you're here, you grew 10%. You're here, you grow 20%. This is the U.S. It grew from 1969, 60%. This line right here are the counties in the U.S. that were rural based on 1950. And what it shows is they grew faster. Urban America, if we're sitting in 1950, grew slower than the U.S. average. Rural America led. So what I say here is one of the reasons why rural looks like it's not doing so well is it'd be like if the Big Ten every year took the best team and put them in the NFL. And pretty soon, Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan State, pretty soon it'd be just Illinois and Indiana and Rutgers would be left. And it wouldn't be a very good conference. And I went to Illinois and I've suffered much because of that. And so the point is that's what's happening to rural America. You cross 50,000, you're now a city in the government data. You get tight commuting links with a city, you're counted as a city. Those are the fastest growing places. And so one reason why rural America looks bad is this process of promoting the winners of rural America are always being promoted up to a city, and it makes it look like it's not doing so well. But I just want to know, here's population growth of rural America, the red line right here. And I just want to know, yes, this shows what I'm just talking about. For the first time in U.S. history, rural America lost population after the Great Recession. The good news is, if you look at all the data, rural America has recovered. It's growing again. On average, across the U.S., just as many people are moving into rural America as there's moving from rural America to urban America. Why urban America is growing faster, it tends to be younger, more children, but also it's gaining about 1 million immigrants per year. more than what rural America is. So that's where the big difference in population growth is coming from. The other feature I just want to note about rural America, this really stuns people when I'm in Europe, is that rural America's, even what I just described, I've promoted up all the winners, they're called cities. Even after I do that, this blue line shows relative to urban America, how much manufacturing is in rural America. So in 1969, it was actually below the US average. It was below the US average. There was less manufacturing. The share of manufacturing was smaller in rural America. I want to explain, it's called a location quotient. But since then, manufacturing now has 60% more intensity in rural America than in urban America. So manufacturing does relatively well. They're just stunned when I say that in Europe. How can that be? It's impossible. So it's not like, rural America is necessarily losing all of its competitiveness. There are places that are doing terrible. So the next thing is that another feature of the New York Times is clearly agriculture is a really important element of rural America, but it's 6% of total employment across the country. It's 4% of total employment in Ohio, in rural Ohio. And so one of the things that what it says is there's 96% of rural Ohioans are doing something different than agriculture. If you think of it as just agriculture, you're going to miss the other 96% who are doing all sorts of things. So the point is that it's a much more diversified place than what the stereotype is. And as I know, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 360 of the 2,000 counties depend upon manufacturing. About 426 are tourist dependence. So, and this just shows what I just said. This is the share of employment in agriculture going back to the 60s. It's 15%, about 6% today. And like I said, in Ohio, it's about 4%. Point is think of rural Ohio as a lot of things. It's a lot more diverse than the stereotype of it. And this just shows a map. This is from the USDA, where they define agricultural dependent as at least 15% of your income comes from agriculture. This is 1950. The green is dependent upon agriculture. And the Great Plains, and this is even in 1950, rural Ohio, it's really shifted over towards manufacturing. You still see some farm-dependent counties in 1950. But you see a swath of green, very, very ag-dependent. Today, in 2000, it's gone down to the Great Plains. That are, and by that, again, that's the USDA's definition, that's their map actually, is 15% of income. So the point being, rural America is really diverse. It's a diverse place, a lot of stuff's happening. If you think of it as only doing one thing, you can forget it could do a lot of other things. So, all right, with that, now I want to talk about Ohio. And this is something that, this is a really, a good story. In the sense that I just told you, remember the map of the US, all this red and rural population loss? There is population loss in rural Ohio, but there's job growth. And the population losses I'll show you in rural Ohio is not lagging urban Ohio to the extent you see nationally. So across our 32 micropolitan areas, I define them, 10 to 50,000 people in the city with their commuting areas. 3 are doing better than Columbus of the 32. 7 are doing better than Cincinnati since the Great Recession. 15 are doing better than the U.S. non-metropolitan average. And 7 are doing worse than the U.S. average. That's pretty good when 80% are beating the U.S. If our core rural, no city of at least 10,000 people. They're really rural, no commute, very little commuting. 17 of those counties, 88 counties in Ohio are core rural. 2 are doing better than Columbus. Wyandotte County, Holmes County. Holmes County is doing much better than Columbus, even going back to 2000. Just incredibly entrepreneurship. 3 are doing better than Cincinnati, 10 better than the U.S. average, and they got cut off, let's see, 13, 15. 2 are doing worse than the U.S. average. Only 2 core rural counties are actually doing worse than the U.S. Let me show you that. In terms of job growth, nationally, metropolitan areas have grown 17% jobs since the Great Recession. Rural America, 0.8% jobs. Terrible. That's terrible across the U.S. In Ohio, we've grown about 10% in terms of jobs. Columbus has grown about a little over 17%. slightly faster than the US average. But if you look at rural Ohio, 7.6%, that's 10 times better than the US average. It's almost 10 times better than the US average. Rural Ohio is, not on it, definitely should not be considered on death support. Now we can find, like, especially in the agricultural community with the commodity cycle where it is, we can find pockets that are not doing particularly well. However, the story is like a Holmes County's lifting itself up by its bootstraps, and despite the fact it's a long ways from the interstate and the educational attainment of Holmes County is quite low, they're doing fantastic. This shows the 10 to 50,000 people. So the top three beating the U.S., beating Columbus, blue's beating Cincinnati, green is beating the U.S. average. These are the ones that are less than the U.S. average. And I want to know, look at Salina. I just showed you Columbus. Columbus has grown about 15% since 2001. Salina's grown about 33%. I mean, in other words, I should be up here. Who's ever doing this, their economic development, Salina should be the one here. I mean, they're doing a fantastic job. Wapakoneta, which is in a little bit better spot, they're growing fast. They're growing fast. Then you have the rest. Then you have cities that, like a place like Van Wert County, which lost so many jobs in the early 2000s. What's impressive is they bounced back. The one at Wilmington, Ohio, Clinton County, just DHL moved out, and it was just it looked like a disaster. It was a disaster for a while, and then you see Wilmington. Where's Wilmington? It's somewhere. There it is. Yes. Look at that. I mean, beating Cincinnati right now since the Great Recession. So places pulling them up by the bootstraps is a general story. This is non-core rural Ohio. These are the really rural counties in Ohio. And they're, like I said, Wyandotte County, 23% job growth. Holmes County has been chugging along even before the Great Recession. The country lost jobs in the decade of the Great Recession. Not Holmes County. Holmes County's growing 20% since the Great Recession. I mean, the rate of that place is remarkable. The entrepreneurship in that county. They don't have a large employer, or maybe one of over 500 is what I've been told. It's just a remarkable place that one could say, well, there's Amish there, yeah, but there are people we can emulate people. Okay, and this is metropolitan areas. The one thing I'll note that's about Ohio, it's not great outside of Columbus. However, where Ohio's really struggling is our smaller ones. And this goes down. It's the smaller metropolitan areas. The Limas of the world, the Springfields of the world that are the ones that are really sucking wind. So our little cities, 10 to 50,000, are doing pretty well, but our cities of 50 to 100,000, not so well. Okay, so this shows it, 2000, 2010. Bluest job growth, hatched areas. These are urban metropolitan areas. Non-hatched, that's rural, non-metro. And you see before the Great Recession, it's blue, and you can definitely see the 3 C's. Nice diagonal down the state. Since the Great Recession, in terms of job growth, it's much more dispersed across the state. I mean, much more spread. And my point being, the rural areas are doing much better. And I won't speak. This is what it looks like in the U.S. Green's metro. I mean, these are metro counties, cities. Green is growth. Red is shrinkage. You don't see much red. That's rural America's job growth. You see a lot of red, but you don't see it in Ohio. Okay, but now, okay, well, something's going wrong in rural Ohio. Okay, I got to find something, and it's population growth. And that's actually a problem for the entire state. You take Franklin County, just Franklin County, the state's losing, I think it's around 60 or 70,000 people since 2010. This is rural Ohio population growth. It's not horrible compared to my beloved Eastern Montana, but it is a population loss. So it's creating jobs, but it's still not retaining population. Now, if the job growth continues, I think that'll reverse itself, but it is losing population. Ohio grew, like in 2018, grew about 0.2% of population. The U.S. average is around 1% growth a year. So, we're going to lose at least one representative in the Congress here after the next census. But that's where rural Ohio is struggling. And here's the map. Population growth, red is faster. Before the Great Recession, that decade, you see the 3 C's, red, population growth. Since the Great Recession, it's just Columbus for the most part. Okay, so what is good policy? So whatever it is, what we should do is be bringing in the Salina economic development person here to tell us. But one of the things I stress, and Bill